My name is Pamela. I am the CEO of Media Savvy Citizens, and every couple weeks we go live and feature everything media and demystifying the media for you. And it may be media literacy or media studies and different concepts around media and technology. So, and it's through a project called the Media of Things. So today we have a very special guest, the author of the book called The Anatomy of Fake News. And we have Nolan Higdon with us today. Welcome, Nolan.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Okay. Hi, thanks for joining us. If we are live, I don't see us live at this moment. So I don't want to waste your time with like discussing and then not being able to actually be able to, record this video. So I apologize for this, and I'm not quite sure. This has never happened before on the Media of Things, but maybe we can just go through with what we're going to do, and I'm make sure to see if we can record this on Zoom, and then see if we can post it to our YouTube channel if for some reason we haven't fully gone live. Okay. So I'm curious to know, now you're a lecturer of media studies at the California State University. You're also the co-host of Along the Line podcast, and you've written this amazing book. This is not your first book. This is your second book, is it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The Anatomy of Fake News. And so I'm curious if you could please define fake news for our audience.
Yeah, I defined fake news as any false or misleading content that's presented as legitimate journalism or news. And I use that broad definition because I thought it gave news users a better understanding of kind of how comprehensive the fake news problem is. Where folks like, Donald Trump were using kind of a very narrow definition of fake news, which was anything he found problematic to his interests. And then other folks have used it pretty politically to sort of only talk about fake news on the other side of the ideological spectrum. My definition is meant to be much more broad, so we can understand that fake news is a really large problem. And if we just kind of play whack-a-mole with very small sectors of the society when it comes to fake news, we'll never actually address it.
Thank you so much. And I think, that it was a really good way of explaining it, whole book about it. And I know that fake news isn't new, even though it's gotten a lot of popularity lately. And so I'm curious to know if you could go a little bit into the history. And I know that you do that in your book. So give us a preview of the history of fake news, please.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the things I wanted to do. I wanted folks to take kind of comfort in the idea that fake news is not a new problem, and so we don't need to take extreme measures to address it. In fact, it's a very old problem. I went back to define fake news. I recognized I first had to define news, and I recognized that news could be communicated through spoken word, through broadcast, through written word, and digital forms, etc. And so I was looking for false or misleading news that was presented in that same way. And you could go all the way back, to Christopher Columbus, which was the earliest example of fake news I found, where he, reported that he was somewhere he wasn't and lied about what he found when he was there. The news from Columbus really shaped what happened afterwards. So I kind of used that as an example of the earliest example of fake news. But I talk about throughout the history that press outlets, both those that are highly respected and those who are marginalized, have published fake news. Governments, including our own, have published fake news. I hope your audience is sitting down. Political parties actually produce fake news as well. And so there's been a long history of these actors producing false content throughout our history. The only thing that sort of makes the present time period a little different is the internet platforms. That is a way that these platforms are created, and they allow fake news to spread further and faster. And because of the way the platforms are designed, they actually incentivize the production and distribution of fake news. So that's kind of one of the sort of things that's different about the present that really you can't say was true in the past.
Wow. I am actually, I remember back to yellow journalism, right? Studying and hearing about yellow journalism and, and realizing like, this is this has been going on for so long. And it's just a matter of, as you were saying, like it's a matter of controlling the message or controlling what goes out, and propagandizing certain messages and certain amount of information. So can you talk
Yes.
a little bit about yellow journalism?
Yeah, I can talk about yellow journalism. I think it's important to note that not all fake news is created with the idea of sort of propagandizing people. Sometimes fake news is literally created for like trivial matters like entertainment. If you go back to like the penny press in the early 19th century, at the time newspapers cost about 6 cents to make and distribute, so you could have a profit. But the penny press created penny papers where they relied on advertising, and rather than journalism, they created fake stories. And the stories were there to entertain. This is where we got stories about like the Batman and the Moon Colony and all these sorts of things. Edgar Allan Poe was a writer for the penny press. But the fake news they were writing was not necessarily to shift belief systems or to manipulate human behavior beyond buying the paper in that sense. Where yellow journalism, there was a clear motive that to sensationalize war was a way to sell newspapers and further national agenda, which was expansion at that time for the United States, particularly during the late 19th century with the Spanish-American War. So there's always been this, unfortunately, kind of corrosive relationship between the press and fake news. Good journalism is the antidote to fake news. But fake news has always been a part of our press system as well. So there's kind of a competing interest there, to say the least.
Yeah. And then, when we're talking about fake news, we are thinking about misinformation, and we're also, recently I was reading about troll farms, and how these entities are getting hired by who knows who to spread misinformation. And so, and even, tout as news. I'm sure that you go into that in your book.
Yeah,
A little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so trolls, typically don't, or excuse me, bots typically do not create, fake news, but these so-called troll farms will. The bots will help like amplify fake news on the internet. And again, that's kind of the new complication that the internet platforms add to the fake news problem, is that they're able to amplify and spread information further and faster. But I do think it's worth noting that I'm not trying to say that like just the invention of the internet itself is what has amplified fake news. It's the way that these companies have created their platforms to incentivize sensationalistic and divisive content, which typically is the defining features of fake news. That's why fake news is spread so easily on these platforms. And I think that's why a lot of our recent discourses, you've seen big tech to try and make this an issue of a few bad actors who create and spread fake news, because they want to deflect or distract from the reality that the way their platforms are designed are actually incentivizing and spreading fake news.
Right. And so that leads us to a discussion on ethics, which we don't need to have right now, but it's something that, this new administration, we hope, is going to be thinking about and working on, to create some equity around that. So I'm curious to know, what are some things users can do to identify and mitigate fake news?
Well, I start this conversation out by saying what I think users should not do. And one of the things I think users should not do is depend upon some like other entity to create a list for them. There's something very McCarthyite about the sensibility of how people want like lists of good news outlets versus bad news outlets. And I would also note that a lot of the institutions that are trying to get in the game of um, going after fake news, whether it be like big tech or government, as I detail in the book, they have a long history of either creating or benefiting from the distribution of fake news. So their interests in combating fake news are suspect. What I argue for is kind of what you're asking, which is we're in a much better place if individuals attain the critical thinking skills to analyze content on their own, to discern fact from fiction, rather than waiting for like big tech or big government to do it for them. And some of the ways folks can do that is one is something that Allison Butler from University of Massachusetts Amherst always says, which is we can recast ourselves as media citizens rather than media consumers. That is, let's remind ourselves we sit down with the press not to entertain ourselves or virtue signal online about how many articles we've read. We have a free press in this country to serve our democracy, so we should look for news outlets that help us better understand what's going on in our country and our world. And that means, quality over quantity. Spend more time with less content and really investigate it. And when I say investigate it, look at who the publisher of the content is. Is it, Washington Post or Breitbart? Does that outlet have a history of producing fake news? Then look at who the journalist is. Just because the outlet has a history of producing good journalism doesn't mean the journalist is good, right? Jason Blair was a fake news producer who worked at the New York Times, and so was Judith Miller, who helped get us into the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which was based on the fake news weapons of mass destruction. So also investigate the journalists themselves. And then once you do that, also look at the news content. Who are the sources? Are they authorities on it? Are they transparently sourced? Be very suspect of like anonymous sources. Also look at who's treated as newsworthy. Are these all people from the same like elite dominant class, or is there a diversity of like working class and poor people? Note the identities of people. Often people of color and women in particular are ignored in news stories. What does that tell us about the messages that are coming from these news outlets? So by reframing ourselves as a media citizen and getting deeper into the content to ask those questions and do that investigative work, we're better kind of positioned to discern fact from fiction. And there are a lot of resources online like fair.org and Media Matters, Snopes and PolitiFact. I wouldn't trust them blindly, but you can go to them as a good starting point for seeing what evidence they use to determine if something's true or false, and then you can dig in deeper. Beyond that, I would also encourage people to recognize that we now live in what I call like a digitized version of Plato's cave. So you customize your friends, you customize your content. Algorithms from these companies also do the same thing, and they generally send you information that you like or want rather than information you need. And we find that people like information that confirms their view. So break out of your media ecosystem, less time on social media, less dependence on Google, more time trying to reach out to actual real humans and news producers who disagree with your ideological viewpoint can be helpful in giving you a more well-rounded understanding of the world and get you a little closer to finding truth.
Those are amazing and great tips. Thank you so much for giving us those tips. And, I know that a lot of times people say like, that's a lot of work. And my personal answer is it just takes practice, right? And then it gets quicker. And for me, when I do a quick research, it could take 3 minutes. Like if I just go through maybe a couple minutes, like I just know how to find the information, where to go. And it takes practice to do that. What do you have any other thoughts around that as far as like, people feeling like that's a lot of work for me to do that?
Yeah, I would echo your same sentiments that if you spend more time, you start to familiarize yourself with outlets and journalists, and it becomes a lot easier. And plus, when you start to recognize that a lot of stuff you come into contact with is actually like blogs or critics or op-eds, you cut that stuff out of your media diet, you're dealing with a lot less content. I'd also say, though, as far as it being a lot of work, look, living in a democracy is a 24-hour-a-day job. I know so many people want to quote unquote go back to brunch, but I think we've spent too much time at brunch. And there's a lot of authoritarian regimes who are looking for new members, so you can join them. But in a democracy, it's our job to constantly inform ourselves, hold the powerful accountable, and use our free press to change who's in charge, to change policy, and restructure our nation the way we want it. So I'm sorry, it's a lot of work, but it's a democracy.
Thanks for that, because I think it's a good reminder, right, that we're all in this together. And we have created this world. We have created the information overload world, and within that, it's knowing how to cut through and how to do it quickly. And so and that's why you wrote this book, I would guess, and to inform people, and to get some insight as to what the mystifying fake news and what it is, and with the context of looking back historically to know how we got here and to know how to move forward with it. So I so much appreciate your time for joining us today. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I guess there's new interface just threw me off, and I still can't, when I go to my Facebook page, I still can't see that we're live. So I apologize for that. And but I do thank you for being here today and for joining us. Do you have any parting words?
I just, I thank you so much for hosting this. This was really cool. And, I thank everybody for tuning in, and I hope they'll check out the book, or also, reach out to me. I'm at Nolan_Higdon, and happy to share resources and other things that folks need.
Cool. Thank you so much. And until next time.
All right. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.